This is Bob Ferguson, and as many of you would know, this is the next episode of Life with Bob.
Mm-hmm.
Just my little forum to the world, my little Walter Mitty thing that I do once a week, where I either hold forth myself or invite amazing people who are in my world to talk to us about things that I think really matter. And tonight we have someone who is really personally very dear to me and also very dear to Fairfield and doing amazing, amazing work in the world. Tera Johnson. Tera was an executive in many companies, CEO in many companies, and ended up creating Tera's Way, which is now, I believe, the #1. Even when you owned the company, before you sold it, it was the #1 grass-fed whey product, and right up there in all of the whey products. And after you sold that company, as I recall, you said, I'm too young to retire, so what shall I do? And so you ended up making a choice that was really, really beneficial for the world by creating the Food Finance Institute at University of Wisconsin Extension. And in that context, we had the opportunity at the Southeast Iowa Food Hub, which is a project of the Sustainable Living Coalition. We had an opportunity to participate in a large USDA grant. We got a $300,000 grant, us and a bunch of the other food hubs. And one of the very first things that we did is hire Tera, who I will let you tell your story, but I just have to get my little licks in here. We hired Tera to do the very first boot camp, and I'll let her explain her evolution from working with individual clients at the Food Finance Institute to boot camp. And we weren't aggregating food at that point, so we just stayed one day. But I wasn't 2 hours in that class when I said, that woman is coming to Fairfield. And so we connected, and we in fact did have you come down and did a fantastic boot camp for I think 9 of our food entrepreneurs. And then we were talking and said, could we do this thing like for a whole town?
Mm-hmm.
Can we do it for a sector? And she goes, no, never done it. But when does that stop for us? And so we did, and we're engaged in that process. So Tera, it's just a delight having you with us. And so why don't you tell us how you got to where you are right now?
Oh, sure. So I think my story kind of starts, I tend to start it when I was running a cheese company. I had a management team, and we actually made all of the little Gouda hockey pucks, you know, they're little red circle, red wax covered hockey puck cheese, which at the time was like super specialty cheese, right? So we made 100% of them in the United States, and because we had this wonderful automated equipment. And we also had a whey division. So we took whey and made animal feed out of it, which is what people used to do with whey in the United States. And I helped sell that company back to the 3rd generation of the family that founded it, which is a whole story in and of itself. But what happened was really an amazing thing. In the 1980s, the family had sold the company to Nestle's, and Nestle's was going to close the factory in the town, which would have been devastating to Hollandtown. So the town got together and bought the company back, which is kind of an amazing thing in the 1980s. I was there later, and by that time, a lot of the people in the community were ready to retire, and they wanted their money out. So they hired me to come in part to help them sell the company and we ended up selling it to the 3rd generation of the original family. And I was too young to retire, once again, too young to retire. And so I decided that I'd be the crazy person who would make the first organic whey in the United States, actually at the time in the world, so for human consumption. Needed a big factory to do that, needed a really unique factory. There was no factory in the world doing whey that could keep different kinds of whey separate, which is what you need to do to have organic.
Right.
So we designed the plant, and I raised $14 million, and we started up the plant, and this is right when the economy fell apart, 2009. So it was a hell of a time to start a business. But in retrospect, there's always good things come from those things. So we started up and we managed to get the plant certified to ship to an infant formula company. And we decided to accelerate the launch of our own brand. We always intended to have one, but not that quickly. But because the economy was so horrible, nobody else was doing new product development. So we're like, well, I guess it's us. So we launched Tera's Way about 6 months after we opened the factory, and we were shipping to infant formula companies. And Whole Foods took us nationally right out of the gate, pretty much nationally. And that's like amazing that that happened. And it's because people wanted that product for a very long time. So, and it was very well done, I have to say. So, so we had an incredible run and it went very quickly. And then, you know, I had investors in the company, and we were starting to get approached. Like, we were 3 years into the company, people were approaching us about purchasing the company. And it was like, whoa, this is kind of fast, but we'll talk, you know. And we were coming out of the recession at the time, and not a lot of profitable companies were available for acquisition at the time because of that. So we became very attractive and decided to sell very quickly. So that was the lead up into starting the Food Finance Institute. And I did that because I learned a lot about money and realized that you can't do much of anything in food and agriculture without money. And people have a really hard time raising money. They don't understand money. There's all kinds of things. So that was the thing that I could do that would make the biggest difference in the world. So I started the Food Finance Institute. And when I started, it was just me consulting. And I had individual clients, which was great. And I helped them raise a lot of money. But there was no scalability in that, right? I could hire other people, but so I decided to take a bit of a different approach. So the things that we've done, I developed a consultant training. So I train consultants around the country. I also developed a boot camp, and that's how I met you for the first time. Yeah.
We were the inaugural deal, weren't we?
Yeah, you were the first. You were the first.
We were the beta.
You were the beta test. Yep. Yeah, and the crazy thing is that the whole process hasn't changed much since the one you participated in. It was really
great.
And that process is designed. Yeah, no, it was great, and it's designed because it's based on my consulting work. It was designed to take a process that usually takes on one-on-one work maybe 6 months to do with a company, and accelerates it, right? So it's in a compressed time frame, and I can work with more than one company at a time. So yeah, we developed that, and I've been delivering them all over the country. Then I started this crazy podcast called Edible Alpha, and you and I were talking about this, right, Bob? This older folks, like, what are we doing with all this technology? And I thought, well, here we go. I'm going to do a podcast. It's going to be a cool thing, you know, and I don't know. We'll see how it goes. Well, it's turned out to be a wonderful thing. So we're over 25,000 downloads, which for a business thing is a pretty big number.
A big number.
It's a big number, yeah. And the content is really good. I was surprised, and the reason it's good is it's me interviewing and not a journalist. So we really do talk about business models and how you make money and how you don't make money, and I have all kinds of stakeholders on. So we've been doing that, and we just started doing an online course. See, technology, I'm getting dragged into it. I'm doing a raising equity course online for food companies and ag people. So kind of a great experimental run. And along the way, you and Fairfield, it's been so great to come to Fairfield because it's such a unique place, but very entrepreneurial, right? You've gotten a lot of recognition over the years for the level of entrepreneurial activity in your little town. So when I came, I had really interesting brands, right? For a lot of, because of the town and knowledge of Ayurveda and things like that. There are just some really interesting brands happening in Fairfield. And then you had this idea, I can credit Bob with the idea of boot camp for a town. And that was the idea with that, and I think it's gonna play out over a period of time. But the idea for that was, what if a town decided that it wanted to make food and value-added agriculture or regenerative agriculture the focus of their economic development for the next 10 years? If a town decided that, what would it look like? You know, that was kind of the question, right? And I'm such a pragmatist about this that I was like, well, I can tell you what it won't look like. A lot of dreaminess. Right, exactly. Not to be negative about it, but there's a lot of dreaminess in the whole local food scene. So, and it tends to create great disappointment. So, but there's also a lot of cool stuff going on if you're pragmatic about it. So yeah, that was what inspired the creation of Boot Camp for a Town.
That's so great. And so Tera, you have a number that you gave me that was really surprising, because I've done my share of entrepreneuring, you know, nothing on a very, very big level, but you know that I've been involved with the company that always makes money,
Right.
50 years, and then many other adventures that have been more in the line of experiences.
Right.
It's very hard to start a business from scratch.
Right.
The base company, someone else started the business. We have a big distributorship, but that's a whole different animal than trying to figure out what the product is, you know, sourcing it, manufacturing it, administering it. That's rocket science. That really is rocket science. And so the clients that you worked with directly, tell us again what percentage of those entrepreneurs actually succeeded and flourished, which was just a crazy number to me.
Yeah, no. So usually people say that, well, you know, a lot of people say they want to be entrepreneurs, right? It turns out like 5% of the population actually does anything about being an entrepreneur. So we went from 100 to 5%.
Right.
Of that 5%, like typically 20% make it, 80% fail. When people get really good technical assistance from somebody like me who really understands the category, really understands what's going on, we've managed to completely flip it. So I started doing so 80% of our people, I started working on this, 6 years ago, 80% of them are still in business. So
that's beautiful. That in itself is just an incredible number.
And I think it's, you know, we have this survival of the fittest capitalism fantasy, right? That somehow that's what capitalism was all about. That, well, throw it against the wall and see what sticks kind of thing. And if they're tough enough, they'll survive or whatever. There's a whole folklore in a way, I think, in our culture about that. And I don't believe that for a minute. I think people need help, and it's as much a function of the community in which they're developing their companies as it is the idea in the beginning, right? Because nobody knows how to do this. Like, I had run existing companies before. I had a hard time adjusting to running a startup, and I'd run companies, right? So
you actually had real experience.
I had real experience, and I still had trouble because it's different to run a startup. And so how we expect entrepreneurs to just start businesses with no help, you know, and somehow they'll make it. It's a crazy idea.
Well, you know, let me just inject something. Tera and I decided that I would figure out one question, like, what's your history? And then we'd go from there.
Right.
So here's a
Here we go.
Here we go. Buckle your seatbelts.
Yeah.
Good friends of mine, their son-in-law wrote a book called Cooperative Advantage. And I'm blanking now at this moment on the fellow's name, but anyways, Cooperative Advantage. His thesis, which I think is borne out in our experience in Fairfield, he said, in an interconnected world where information is totally fungible, I mean, you can get information anywhere, and you know, there's not, the barrier to entry is not information.
Right.
a company that thinks that they're going to make it in an environment like that, just with the intellectual property inside the walls of that company, even if it's 300,000 employees, is delusional.
Mm-hmm.
Because the knowledge outside their walls is so much greater than the knowledge inside the walls, that the companies that really flourish are the companies who learn how to cooperate and tap that vastly greater IP that's out there that isn't inside their business, and in the process benefit them, benefit others, which really is what nature does, right? You know, people, I think it was, I'd heard that it was in the best interests of the ruling class in Great Britain to pervert Darwin's observations that nature was a vast cooperative web into survival of the fittest, nature red in claw and tooth, which then gave the intellectual basis for dominating other cultures.
Right.
Now, I'm getting way off, we're way into the weeds on that, but I've read that enough.
Yeah.
And so
well, it has a lot. It says that's the intellectual tradition underlying our philosophy about entrepreneurship, right? That
exactly. And that's why I brought it up.
Exactly. So I think I mean, the results that we have suggest that that's not true. And the other thing I can lend to that is when I did Tera's Way, actually back when I was running that cheese company, I joined a tech group, a CEO group, and that was a group of CEOs. We met every 6 weeks. We had a mentor. And these were like $300 million companies. There was a guy in there had $1 billion in annual sales, and they're in a peer group and they have a mentor, right?
Yep.
It's like, okay, so the people that we think are kind of gods about this, who know everything, actually are the ones who admit that they don't. Mm-hmm. And they surround themselves with people who can help them, and in an organized way. So yeah, there's a lot to be said for this technical assistance thing that we're doing.
Yeah, and this evolved, I say, truly in the literal sense of the word in Fairfield, because
right.
when the TM organization bought the old Parsons College that was moldering away on Route 1 here,
right,
and a bunch of people wanted to come and just kind of be part of the scene, be part of this grand experiment. But this was at that time a fairly stagnant town, as in terms of employment and all that, because there were a few very well-established businesses, a rich history of innovation. We had the largest Chautauqua in Fairfield, outside of Chautauqua, New York. I mean, Chautauqua Park, down 5 blocks from where I live, had a pavilion that seated 5,000 people. We think we're doing well when we have a arts and convention center that seats 540. Mm-hmm. So there's a rich tradition, but the town was not flourishing in the way that it's flourishing now. But a lot of people came in, they didn't know anything. They came with $200 suits and $200 cars and a shoes. The whole thing.
Right, the VW bugs, right?
It was a little bit of a mess. But people really wanted to be here, so they just figured it out. And so they just started to create companies, and many of them were disasters, but some of them weren't. And gradually, over the last 40 plus years, we've developed an entrepreneurial ecosystem where we have the CoLab, which is a working space down there, which gets people together. We have mentoring groups. We have informal mentoring groups. We have a very, very active Fairfield Economic Development Authority that's run by a young man, with big vision. It isn't just the old boys and old girls sitting there kind of doing their thing. So, and it's a highly cooperative environment. In many places in the world, when a person has an idea, other people get a little territorial, that they might get some other emotion. And so they tend to want to take their 6-inch hat pin and stick it into the balloon of the other person's bright idea. Here in Fairfield, the norm, I won't say that doesn't happen, but the norm is, wow, that's a cool idea. Can I play too? What can I do to help you? You should talk to. And so we just kind of circle the wagons like that and do things together.
Yeah, I've also noticed that I think you know, in part this is because I self-select to work with entrepreneurs, right? But there's something about people in Fairfield that they do not show up with fear. Like there's a lot of fear in our culture right now, right? Fear, and I do money a lot, right? So people are like really afraid of money. And you guys don't show up that way at all. That's not what your base of, you know, functioning isn't there, which is sadly a really unique thing.
That's cool. That's cool.
Yeah.
So we did boot camp for a town, and
Yeah.
we defined three major goals.
Yeah.
What did we do? We did regenerative ag, supporting that.
Mm-hmm.
We did a fund,
Mm-hmm.
financing. Then we did branding and tourism.
Mm-hmm.
So let's put that on the board here. Let's go back and kind of zoom up to 30,000 feet and look at what's going on with the system, because I advertise for the people who are watching, and thank you very much for watching. I thought I could get this thing to run on my cell phone so I could see who was there, but I can't. So I have to appreciate you from afar.
Yeah.
Appreciate everyone who's been watching. So let's see, what was that? Okay, so 30,000 feet. We want to look at what's going on with our system right now. Because when I advertised the call, I said, reimagining the food system. Well, you know, most people are eating, and we got food running around, and you know, so what's going on? If you can say, what's wrong with the current system, or what's unsustainable about the current system? And then let's talk about what would an alternative actually look like.
Right. Okay.
Not a dream alternative.
Yeah, exactly. So it was interesting. I was on a phone call this week with somebody from Iowa who said, how much biblical weather do we need to have in order for people to realize that there's something going on with the climate, right? We're doing the flood thing up here in the Midwest, but everybody around the country has their own version of wackiness with the weather, right? And I think this is probably the first year where we're going to start to see some real impacts on prices and actual economic activity. So so traditional agriculture is actually struggling quite mightily. We're probably, the farm credit people will say we are in year 5 of a severe recession, if not depression in agriculture, which is really hard for people, you know, because the rest of our economy has been doing pretty well, right? So the fact that agriculture has been struggling like this has really been not visible to most people. So why is agriculture struggling? And now the biblical weather, what does that do? Well, there are a bunch of things going on. So traditional agriculture has been built on a system since the 50s anyway, of applying basically chemistry to agriculture. We've been chemists, and we've been increasing yields consistently. We did that by breeding and cloning and all kinds of increasingly scientific, quote unquote, technologies applied to plants that optimize their performance under a certain set of conditions. And then conditions are narrow, right? So part of what they do is give up resilience to variability in conditions to get higher yield under a more controlled set of conditions. And that worked really well until a couple of years ago, when what our norms for what that window of variability, we're suddenly in a world where everything is more variable. And you don't know from one year to the next what it's going to be. It could be wind, it could be pests, it could be rain, it could be biblical flooding, you know, all this stuff that we're kind of experiencing. And so agriculture is kind of hitting a wall here right now. And it needs a different path. And it turns out kind of like the Darwin thing, right? The biological systems are more inherently resilient. So they're more adaptable. And so there's a whole need for agriculture to shift out of this path that it's been on since the 50s into something that is more resilient. the other thing that's happening is consumers are changing too. Like we used to be happy eating Twinkies and Oreos and, you know, we all watch the same TV and we all, right? And now all of the health impacts of that are starting to become more obvious to people, and people are more concerned about what they eat. And so there's an unprecedented amount of change going on in the food industry because consumers are changing too. And they care how their food is being raised on a farm, right? That they're looking for that visibility and that traceability all the way back to the farm. And then they do that and they don't like what they see, right? So that's a massive change. We are really undergoing a massive change right now, both in agriculture and food.
Yeah, I've read some articles that big food is really being
Hammered, totally. So you'll see if you pay attention, because you're like in the industry, right? CEOs are lasting maybe 2 years and they're out, and stock prices are going down, and food companies tend to be like reliable earnings producers, right? So you know, a stock market newbie like Warren Buffett actually bought Heinz Kraft, right? And did a big merger with the South American company that all they do is like grind away at prices and make it worse. And the stock keeps going down, right? Because consumers don't want that anymore. It's not that they don't, you know, the brand of Heinz ketchup still has value, but they look at what's in the ingredients and go, I don't want that. So big food is not doing really well. And the other thing that's happening then is who's doing the innovation? Well, it tends to be the young new companies, right? And so we have new forms of new kinds of products coming all the time in young entrepreneurial companies. And you see farms that are doing entrepreneurial things too. So it's kind of a sea change going on, actually.
Right. So if I can summarize, we have a system that is optimized, absolutely optimized for a narrow set of conditions, which includes the price of oil, which includes a relatively stable climate, which includes a lot of things, but is even with those elements, as I understand it, beginning to break down. One of the breakdowns is the loss of topsoil.
Right.
As I understand it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but Iowa has about half of the topsoil it used to have.
Yeah, no, and you had like feet of topsoil, right? It was an astonishingly rich soil. And that's happened all over the country. We've been mining our soil. We've been killing it by adding stuff, the biological activity of it, intentionally killing it, whereas a more biological system would be enhancing it. So yeah, I mean, and what I find interesting is what has changed really this year, I think, for certainly for me and a lot of people, I think, that concept of like, yeah, the soil's going down the Mississippi and it's half what it used to be or whatever. It was such a, I don't know, intellectual conversation, right? But now people are like, okay, so my heat was on. It's June, right? I got up this morning, my heat came on because our weather is so variable, and every farm that I'm working with is really in trouble. Like, I don't know how much corn got planted in Iowa, but I bet it's like 50%.
I don't know, but as a very dedicated backyard gardener, I'm just noticing some weird things, because my mom has been in this house, was in this house from '84 forward. I've witnessed our organic garden the whole time, and I've planted fruit trees. You know, a number of years ago, the drought wiped out a gooseberry patch that had been there for decades and began to wipe out the black raspberries. This year, all the rose of Sharon just all of a sudden died, except for a couple little sprouts. I go to the mulberry tree and there aren't as many mulberries. The pear tree didn't even make pears, got some good cherries. And then when I go into the garden, it's just, you know, almost kind of on an intuitive level. It just feels weird. There's something. And so I asked a person who runs a greenhouse and other people, I said, everyone is saying that.
Yeah.
It's because we've had an unbelievable amount of rain that has devastated, just completely wiped out Western Iowa.
Right.
Just, I have a friend who had a plant in Western Iowa. He's pulling the plant out. I mean, as he said,
Wow.
I looked at that million-year floodplain. There's
Yeah.
no way that I could ever rebuild anywhere near that area. There's a lot of jobs. They were a major, major employer. And so,
It's
when we live in the city, when you go up to Coralville, to the mall, in Iowa City, it doesn't look like anything's wrong.
right.
Boston, everything's cool, cooking along. I was in Dallas. Dallas is humming. They're building houses to beat the band.
Right.
So it's very difficult for people in an urban environment where the isness of the thing just keeps rolling along. The subdivisions keep going in. Everything. The party is,
Right.
is still going on.
Yeah, right, exactly.
As the iceberg rips a hole in the hull, right?
Right. Yeah, no, and I think every year we get closer. So I was at an event. I was invited to this event because it was an organic seed company. But there were scientists there from places like UC Davis, and there were some people there who consult regularly with Monsanto and Bayer. And, those to me are kind of, what I think a lot of people would consider the enemy, right? A little bit. And what was interesting is one of the scientists we were kind of out, it happened to be a woman, and we were by the bathroom, of course. And she started talking to me and said, we've been optimizing for so long for yield, that we've gotten rid of all the resilience. And I said, so that's why you're here, right? Because you want to get some of the traits of the organic. And she's like, oh yeah, because we don't know how we're going to survive without it. So that was like somebody from
Monsanto, the bad guys, right?
The bad guys, like no, really, seriously. It's kind of reminds me of people like small business owners and farmers who will say, I'll say, you need to have a strategy for dealing with climate variability. And they'll look at me like, and the million of things that I need to deal with, do I really have to do that? I'm like, uh-huh. And big companies are doing it now, right? They're not in denial about it. They've got plans. Their shareholders are starting to call them to account for having plans. So,
Ray, the largest reinsurer is basically saying, you don't have a plan for managing the risk around carbon,
right,
risk and all that, we may not insure you.
Right. No, I get it. I think it's coming down. So big time coming down with food and agriculture. So when I think about so we're in that context. Then I think the other thing that has made people concerned is the globalization of our food industry has gotten people when our president for a while was flirting with the idea of having tariffs of 25% with Mexico, people pointed out that a lot of our food comes from Mexico, and basically there are a lot of crops that we have 3 days worth of supply, right? 3 days is all we would have, and so so there are a lot of people who worry about that too, so we have the climate thing, but we also have this geography thing going on, that how resilient is this if something were to go bad? We don't even have the infrastructure anymore. And that is something that is a place where rural America is actually doing better in a way, because we actually still have infrastructure to a certain extent, right? That's where the cities are really vulnerable and behind. So lots of interest in urban agriculture and exurban and suburban agricultural alternatives, and trying to get processing closer to people. And initiatives like that are happening around the country as well, to try to bring some geographic resilience to all this.
Well, Tara, we were working with Jim Braun, who led the team that created the new laws that Quinn signed into law, changed the dynamics in Illinois. I don't know all the details, but purchasing requirements, that kind of thing, that energized local food. And they had a whole coalition of people. all different elements of things. Some who you would think, would not be enthusiastic about local food, and more enthusiastic about the big, kind of industrial ag model. But the key, the person who was the kind of the keystone on the arch was the public safety person in Chicago.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the question was posed to him is that, forget about climate change and everything else, what if we had a earthquake like the one that hit the New Madras Fault in 1848 in Missouri that rang church bells in Boston?
Mm-hmm.
How many bridges in the Midwest would stand? He said, basically none.
Mm-hmm.
How soon would people start starving?
Mm-hmm.
Really soon.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole idea of increasing geographic resilience, not to speak of all the other benefits.
Mm-hmm.
So
No, and I think one of the other amazing things that I see happening when people start like looking into their local food system issues and resilience, they start caring about their communities and other people in their communities in ways that they it's not like people don't care, but you're busy and you don't pay attention and that kind of thing. And you start engaging with local food and you suddenly are engaging with your neighbors in a real productive way. So I've been seeing this in community after community, all over the country. It's really exciting. That's probably one of the most exciting things for me.
that's great.
Yeah.
So we have a big centralized system, primarily centralized system. Most of the stuff either comes from overseas, the Central Valley, or different areas of the country that have specialized in the turn of the, not last century, but the century before.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Iowans ate about 95% of their food came from Iowa.
Right.
We were at one time the potato capital of the world. We were the apple, or the United States. We were apple capital. We had 80 varieties, commercial varieties of apple. And just wild stuff that we have just completely lost.
Right.
And we had infrastructure, and we had a higher population than we do now.
Yeah.
More people in Iowa than we do now. We have kind of lost that infrastructure because it was much more convenient to have the stuff shipped in from the Central Valley, and it was cheaper.
Right.
From one standpoint. So that's the system we have. So if you were going to redesign, I know this is what we've got. I said we could go for an hour. So we got like 22 minutes. We're going to redesign the entire food system. Go.
Right, in 22 minutes.
Yeah, we had 22 minutes. But what would the broad structures of a redesigned, more resilient, healthier system that created healthier food, that valued food more? Factoid, or actually relevant fact, I understand that France spends twice as much, each French family spends twice as much on food as we do, and they spend half of what we do on healthcare.
Right.
So, 21 minutes now, go.
Tera's queen for a day, right?
Yeah, queen for a day. You can redesign the whole thing. Let's get to it. Let's hit the punchline here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my perspective on this is probably different than other people because I don't think that local food systems are the only answer to this. I think that's definitely a part of this, though, right? I think about it as layers in a way. There's this coming back to understanding what can be local. I think it's got to be an entrepreneurial thing. Because I think institutions right now are not working so well, and I can't imagine anytime soon they're going to. So I think this is an entrepreneurial endeavor, and it wouldn't need to be in other countries where government is still more responsive. It's probably government led, but anyway. Yeah. So we got to figure out a way and we got to do it fast. So the urgency of this, given what is going on with all of the things we've been talking about, this isn't like an intellectual exercise that we're going to study for the next 20 years. Like we got to start doing this today. So this would be having communities sort of taking back their their food basically, and saying we need to be producing more things locally. We need to have more processing locally. We need farmers again. We need to care about farmland preservation. We got to have open space in order to do this. And we need indoor production, right? We're going to need indoor production given what's going on with the climate. So how are we going to do that? Like, and then you kind of peel the layer of the onion, and this is why it gets back to the beginning of our conversation. How do we get this to happen faster? The entrepreneurial thing to happen faster. And because it's such a key to making this happen, right? And everything we talked about how you can actually change the odds of success for these enterprises if you give them some good technical assistance and help in the community. So that's definitely a part, I think, of the solutions that we need to develop. So there's that. The layer that I would add onto this is healthcare. So healthcare, the relationship between food and healthcare, you were saying about the French, right? They spend, right. There's all kinds of evidence that how we eat affects our health outcomes. And getting Western medicine to be more engaged with this issue of food as medicine is got to be part of the conversation too, because right now they go off and, if we can't do it in a controlled scientific study, then we can't really say that this kind of diet is better for you. But in a lot of ways, we don't have time. It's really hard to conduct those studies. So we got to figure out other ways to engage the medical community in changing the food system. So those are two things. And then the place where I probably diverge with people is that I think to have a resilient business model as a farm or as a small food company, you need geographical diversity. So, and I say that because like the epic flooding thing that happened around here, right? If you were a farmer that was doing something specific, now maybe very biologically based farming techniques, right? Regenerative agriculture techniques. I have a couple of examples of grazers here who are pristine grazers, right? So which in grazing systems do all kinds of wonderful things for the soil. So they're pristine, wonderful farms. They have had a lot of trouble because of the rain this year. And so what would it look like if they had a partnership with somebody in a very different geography who had similar practices and similar values, right? Maybe it's Missouri, or maybe so far enough away so that they would, maybe they'll have different problems or no problems. Like there's some diversity in the geography.
Western Iowa to Eastern Iowa, and
right, you're right.
Des Moines River Valley or the Skunk River Valley. Up high, like Fairfield is, like other ground is. Yeah.
Right. I mean, so there's within states, without a states, right? The idea though of like local isn't the only issue anymore because of what's going on. We got to find resilience in whatever way we can. And then the other thing that is that is sort of foundational to this is these biological systems that are more resilient, that deal with weird weather better, right? And a lot of those are a huge emphasis on soil and various techniques for doing that. My queen for the day thing would be that all the regenerative ag people would actually get along with each other and respect each other instead of saying my regenerative is better than yours, because there's a lot of that going on, and it doesn't advance the agenda very well, right? So organic and grazing and soil amending, and permaculture, these are all approaches that are regenerative. So we need way more implementation of those too. Yeah. So and I'm looking on, we'll probably go another 5 minutes for those people, the wonderful people who are on Facebook. Yeah. Hey, you finally showed up on my cell phone. We'll go another 5 minutes and then we'll just have you back, Tera, because— There you go. Perfect. We'll go part two.
so many ways that we can drill down on this, but this is a really, really, really good overview. Part of my background is I'm the first generation born off the farm on both sides of my family. The little strawberry and sorghum farm that my father grew up on.
Okay.
4 boys growing up in one room. They all ended up going to the University of Missouri, all ended up with advanced degrees. My grandmother was their teacher in a little 2-room schoolhouse.
Yeah.
I grew up on a dairy farm in northern Missouri, where my grandfather never went to the chemical route after the war. He said,
No,
I'll put that stuff in
don't
my
like
soil.
that stuff. Yeah.
Kill my soil. He had access in the dairy, for
Mhm.
manures and all that. And so they used to use the honey wagon. And I remember corn growing in the bottomland before you went up the glacial hill to the house. I was on my uncle's shoulder. My uncle was a tall guy, and the
Yeah.
corn was twice as high.
Yeah.
It was just like crazy, crazy great stuff. But my uncle Carl on my dad's side actually was a grad student of William Albrecht at the University of Missouri in the late 1930s. Albrecht was the father of biologically based soil fertility. He spent his entire career in Haiti, Morocco, Baghdad, all over the world, training people how to build soil, how to use biology to build fertility, because biology is absolutely the basis of fertility, not chemistry. Chemistry is like, you can feel really good on crack.
Yeah. Right. Right. For 5 seconds.
It's not a sustainable. Yeah, it's not a sustainable deal. The fertility, no one fertilizes a forest, right?
Right.
Well, the forest fertilizes itself. So how do you get back? It's not being airy-fairy or hippie or whatever like that. Nature's been at it for 4.5 billion years. You might want to take a clue.
Right. Well, and I think part of what we get to do is think about it differently, that it's not going backwards, right? So we think of it as going backwards because it's the way our grandparents farmed. And honestly, we aren't going to farm the way our grandparents farmed, right? We actually do know things that are useful for biological farming now. So it is as scientific. I had this conversation with somebody about grazing and said, I'm not technology phobic, right? Like the electric fence that you can move was developed recently in New Zealand, and it has been transformational in terms of what has happened to grazing agricultural systems, whether they be dairy or beef. Transformational technology, soft technology, not that expensive, right? But that does not mean it's not transformational.
Oh, totally. I mean, Francis Ticky here at Radiant Stereo, that's what he does. He has 60 paddocks. They only get acre paddocks. They go down, opens up the fence. All the cows line up like a big brown lawnmower and fertilizer machine, and just
right. And then every 12 hours they get fresh grass.
Right. They get fresh grass, and each paddock is only grazed once every 2 months.
Right.
Francis has done miraculous things with that ground over the last 20 years. So it really, as I'm hearing what you're saying, Tara, is that it's not a Procrustean kind of system where if you're too long, they chop you off, you're too short, they stretch you out.
Right.
It doesn't fit that. We need to take a look at, this is my view, maybe I'm just projecting my personal sensibilities, but nature is a great teacher. And as someone has pointed out, she owns the stadium and always bats last. And so we can only kind of end run nature for a certain amount of time before she just kind of gets around in the little thing that we do. And so in order to be productive for a long time, in order to have a resilient food system where we're really creating healthy food, there's so many distortions in the system now that can many be solved by looking at biology for fertility and localizing to the extent that's possible. And then, as John Eichert, who's going to be my guest next week, 2 weeks from now, great agricultural economist from the University of Missouri, speaks all over the world. His notion is a network of hyperlocal systems network together to create the kind of resiliency that you're talking about. Because if you're a farm and the only supplier you have is in Western Iowa, guess what? You're out of luck.
Right, right.
Because everything's under 10 feet of water.
Right, right. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. That net, call it what you want, the network or partnership or whatever. But yeah, we have to bring as much resilience as we can, and biological and geographical and communities too around their food security too. It's definitely part of this. Yeah.
Well, and a very, very important point you made is that I believe when people are abstracted from their food,
Mm-hmm.
food production, it creates a certain quality of life, which is different if a person is connected, if families are connected. Now, it sounds a little woo-woo, but I think there's some very, very, very practical reasons why that is the case.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that we can kind of wrap things up for the time being, and I'll maybe put out a little poll on my Facebook
Oh, there you go.
Hey, of all of the things that we talked about, what's
Mm-hmm.
the most interesting? And we'll just have you come back on a fairly regular basis and talk about these things,
I'd
because
love to do that. Yeah, I'd love to do that. So I gotta tell you about this. I just released a podcast on Edible Alpha that is about a really transformational food pantry. So just to give you an idea of what is possible, right? This is a food pantry in rural Montana that sources all the food for its clients from local farms, and they process it all on site, and they have Meals on Wheels program for people whose incomes aren't low enough for Meals on Wheels. They have a culinary training program for their clients, and do job placement for their clients. They talk about the food pantry as an engine of economic development. Isn't that transformational?
it's so amazing. And it goes right along with that example you had from West Virginia, where a physician started this.
Mm-hmm.
One other point, and I'll post this, everyone. I have Bruce finally finished the video. We had a guy named Ray Mailer, who is actually a physician, who transitioned from that into farming, had an accident, couldn't do what he was doing before, so he went into regenerating farm ground. But before he left, he was very, very committed to changing people's experience of health by virtue of their diet.
Right.
He did an experiment where, I guess, somewhat inadvertent, where he was dealing with a work comp pool.
Mm-hmm.
And the work comp pool was, costing one. I'm probably hashing the thing up completely, but you can listen to his explanation. But the total outlay for this in this particular circumstance was like 1.3 million.
Mm-hmm.
And these were truckers and people like that who aren't known, for their, culinary sophistication. That's
Right.
Majority, but just folks who you wouldn't necessarily be totally paying attention to their diet. And so he simply prescribed, and they just ate in a more healthy way. Result, same pool, cost $300,000.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? In this food pantry, they're now they have 16 clients who've agreed to 20 clients who've agreed to only eat from the food pantry for 16 weeks, and they're tracking their A1C levels and waist, girth, and stuff, and they're seeing, they don't have the data isn't all chewed up yet, but they're seeing great improvement. So there's so much is possible. There's so much change we could have.
See, I think one of the greatest externalities, defined as something that a system doesn't pay for, is thrown outside.
Mm-hmm.
Like pollution is an externality. The company that's polluting doesn't pay, but someone pays, right?
Mm-hmm.
We all pay in one way or the other. One of the greatest externalities of our current system is the pretty disastrous state of our public health.
Yeah.
The fact that now I think north of 70% of the people in the U.S. are either overweight or obese.
Right.
That's not natural. And that is absolutely a result of how people eat, and that's a result of what people are enculturated to eat, and it's a result of the economics of our system.
And honestly, it's also a result of how we've changed agriculture, right?
Oh, yeah.
Beef, we would all be dead if beef was always bad for us, or meat was always bad for us to eat, right? I mean, we probably would not have survived the caveman era. So something has happened, and what's happened is we treat the animals way differently than they were meant to be treated and fed, right? So changes the whole profile of the nutritional profile of what we're eating.
You know, and we have a lot of folks who are going back to a, you know, paddock grazing model, and if it is whatever one's proclivities on that is at least not unhealthy.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Source that doesn't, you know, that has what it's supposed to have in it in order to effectively nourish. So anyway, Tara, wow. I could go I definitely could go for another 2 hours, but I do have I told him I'd show up around 8 o'clock for dinner. So
okay, good. All right, good. Well, thank you for bringing me on your show.
Well,
it's super fun.
It's a fantastic thing, and we just love you in Fairfield. You've made a very, very big impact. Too.
Yeah, cool.
So very good. Okay, so next week, I'm angling to get Troy Van Beek, who was a Navy SEAL and transitioned to go to come to the university here and now runs an amazingly at-scale solar company. He's seen the impact of relying on fossil fuels and all of the stuff that happens overseas on that basis. He is dedicated to bringing the price of energy as close as zero as it possibly can be, so we can avoid some of those things. I've invited him, not sure he's going to come on, but some of the cool thing, or I'll hold forth myself. And then the weekend after that is, I believe, John Eichard. And so yeah, we got a great lineup coming up. So Tara, bless you. Thank you very much.
Yep, thank you. Have a good night.
We will finish the live. Okay, stop live stream. So see you all later.